What defines success?
You think about life and you say, okay, ordinary inputs lead to ordinary outputs. If you want extraordinary outcomes, it has to be extraordinary inputs.
What happens when you get knocked down?
I don't think there's one worse mistake. I think unfortunately what happens is you make a mistake and then you try to fix that mistake by making a series of other mistakes. And you often forget when was the first mistake made.
What makes some people radiate?
Big ideas mean big opportunities. It takes the same amount of effort to build a small company as to build a big company, so why not?
This is Radiate.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Radiate, where we interview some of the world's most successful people to find out how they work their way to the top. He once took on broadcast television networks, and now he's taking on the big guys who deliver the internet. Chet Kanojia is a four-time entrepreneur who's just started his latest venture called Starry, which promises to deliver broadband to your home wirelessly. If I can explain it simply, I think of it like Wi-Fi over Wi-Fi. I've known Chet for years. I was there when he fought for his company Aereo all the way to the Supreme Court. And if you don't remember Aereo, its technology helped deliver television content on demand for free. All the big networks hated it because they could lose viewers on their own channels. So it's a great pleasure to have Chet joining us to talk about what drives him to keep battling the big guys. I think you'll enjoy this. Chet, great to have you on Radiate. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Chet, I wanted to start off by first asking you how Starry is doing. So Starry is what, your fourth company you've started?
Give or take, yes.
Okay, so how is it doing?
Good. We're getting ready we launched our first retail product, which got great reviews. So we're ramping up sales on that. And we're launching our first beta market for the Starry Internet service, which is a wireless ISP, which is going to be in the Boston area in the summer. So firing on all cylinders, growing. We're almost 70 people now, which is sort of hard to imagine, but
Wow.
all good.
And how much did you raise?
We didn't disclose the amount we raised, Betty, but we've done Series A thus far.
And what is the difference this time around than before?
Well, the common theme is, it's a big mission. So that's always helpful and fun and
Right.
easy to recruit people in.
Well, you like big ideas though, Chet.
I don't know if they're big ideas. These are all obvious ideas, but they're execution challenges, right? So it's fun to do those. It's big ideas mean big opportunities. It takes the same amount of effort to build a small company as to build a big company. So why not? Right. The obvious difference is that there are no sort of binary regulatory hurdles in our way. So, we're cautiously optimistic that things are going well.
But outside of that, because I know what you're referring to, which is Aereo, which of course had huge regulatory challenges that ultimately meant the end of the company. This time around, though, I mean, is it almost like, because I'm curious, since me being a budding entrepreneur right now with Radiate, does it become like autopilot almost to you, as you're starting a new company?
It's never autopilot, right? Because my view is the first and foremost, the most important thing that at this stage that matters is people. Who are the people, and getting great talent to be attracted to you, and build a great working relationship with all your colleagues and people that you are taking on a responsibility to bring into your company. It's never autopilot, right? Yes, the mechanics of incorporation and financings and a lot of that stuff can get a little autopilot-y and mechanical, but let's not, the fundamental difference between a great company and a not great company is just the people. And recruiting people is hard.
It is hard. So do you have any secrets to that?
Transparency, number one. Which is partly why, doing sort of like a big mission theme type of a company makes it harder on one level, because a lot of people say you must be nuts that you're going to start a global ISP from scratch. That's just silly. On the other hand, people that see that there is the technological innovations make those things possible, they get attracted to the mission, and so it becomes a self-selecting group. Keeping that along with the transparency. And I manage personally. I'm a terrible manager, so my default management style is relationships with people I work with. And so if you blend those three, and I think that comes across with your colleagues in interviews and everything else that, okay, these are a group of people that it's not just a job for them. This is their way of life. They love what they do. And
Yeah.
so to the extent that you can project that genuinely, I think helps.
So when you mentioned your management style, so what is your default management style?
Lack of it.
Okay.
So my goal is to surround myself with people that are far more competent than I am and to be able to give them sufficient runway, a big enough mission, and then basically act as sort of editor reviewer as opposed to telling them what to do.
So how do you do that? Because aren't you tempted to make sure things are going the way you want them to go? I mean, how do you do that?
Well, of course, you're tempted and more often than not, my view is, and my experience has been that the more temptation you have, the more you are likely to set it down the wrong way, right? So you
Interesting.
are going to, and if you have been lucky enough to attract some really competent, good people, let them fail. Because chances are, if this, in particular at Starry, where the number of disciplines involved, even in bringing a product to market and then marketing the product, are just so diverse that you just don't have any capability to span all of those, right? So the best you can do is get great people, give them a clear mission, set clear sort of hurdle rates, and then sufficient resources, and encourage them and do sort of an editor's function.
And how do you do that? Like, how do you set the goals?
Well, you work backwards from kind of where you want to end up in, 10 years, 5 years, 24 months, 12 months, and then forget all the 5 and 10-year stuff, right? And just basically focus on where do you want to end up in 12 months. And I look at it that as you want to end up, what do you want to end up in your cash position? First and foremost, because companies live and die by if they have money or they don't have money.
Right.
Where do you want to end up in your cash position? What are the milestones you want to meet in getting to that cash position, right? Because when you start a company, you put in X million dollars and you're basically eating that cash down. So you want to end up, what are the milestones and where do you want to end up in your cash position? And where do you, to the extent you have you may have a great big goal in 5 years or 10 years, but all of it comes down to execution on those milestones. Do you have the right tactics to do that? So that's what you do. And then you break that down into monthlies, and then you break that down into, and I tend to do it on a monthly basis.
Right.
This is the amount of progress I want to make month X, month Y, month Z. And you have to set big milestones very early on, because human nature is that unless there is a target to hit, we won't hit it.
Yeah.
If you give somebody a 10-foot target, they're going to hit a 10-foot target. If you give a sharpshooter a 2-inch target at 100 yards, they will hit it. They may take 10 times, but chances are they're going to get there. And that's really what you have to do, is progressively make the target smaller and smaller.
And doing that, you found, has led to the greatest success. I mean, was that a lot of trial and error? I mean, early on in your life, were you more of a micromanager?
100%. You know everything. Everybody else is an idiot around you. How could they possibly accomplish anything? And then you realize, going through the process, that no, most of these people are a lot smarter than you are. They're attracted to you for some intangible set of reasons. So be comfortable with that, and focus on what you can do the best, which is make sure they have resources.
Chet, why are you an entrepreneur? I'm always curious about this with people who built companies. Like, why do you do it?
I like making things. It's fun. And it is, first and foremost, it's kind of the most satisfying thing to me is moving paper or coming up with an idea or a strategy is not that fun, not that attractive to me. Making things is fun because then you look at it and then you get all excited and then you use it, right? So those things are really kind of induce a different type, sort of like a neural pattern, I suppose. And then, a lot of us have been fortunate enough that, we've been around the block a few times. So we really evaluate all of these things in terms of, okay, so making things is cool. Hopefully if you make things and you take care of your customers and your employees, everything else sort of falls in line. You can take care of things. But at the end of the day, did you make something that moved the needle forward? Did it progress at least maybe it's a very narrow view, but your view of what good world should be? Have you made any progress in that? And so that's, at the end of the day, you're going to die. Everybody dies, right? So you won't take money with you. You won't take anything else except, did you accomplish something? And did you make something? Is there your name on something that people liked. So it's kind of cool.
So that's how you define legacy in a way, right?
Not even legacy, but just like a way of life. It's a lot of fun to make things.
And were you like that as a kid? I mean, was there anything?
Always.
Yeah.
Always, yeah.
Like, tell me how.
I mean, when I was 13 or 12, I had like a small speaker business because, I figured out that loudspeakers were expensive in India, so nobody really made bookshelf speakers. So I decided bookshelf speakers could be good business. And a friend of mine used to make amplifiers, so we sort of teamed up. I made bookshelf speakers, really terrible bookshelf speakers.
Right.
They were priced right. They're terrible. So yeah, I've always been like that. I always like making things.
And do you think there's something from your immigrant background that has also helped you be an entrepreneur?
I don't think so, no. I mean, maybe. I haven't thought about it that way. I think entrepreneurs are just, I think people are people, right? So every culture, I think, has the same number, or proportionally, I suspect, similar people who want to be working at a big company, and there are probably equal number that are, I suspect in the U.S., probably attracts a lot more entrepreneurs given our policies and kind of who we idolize, and incredible companies that have been built, and not just recently, right, back from Standard Oil days or whatever, or Vanderbilt. So I suspect a lot of people, there's probably a higher percentage,
right?
But I think some people are just built that way. They want to buck the norm.
What about in your childhood? Outside of the fact that, you built some speakers, at least you got the price right on them. What do you think in your childhood, whether it's something, that was taught from your parents or something else that happened to you that you think kind of was formative enough to make you who you are today? Because I always think these things, go back to what happened when you were a kid.
I do think parents create the right environment, or at least, but it's funny, I'm one of three.
Okay.
And the other two have nothing to do with entrepreneurship or anything else. They're probably the most risk-averse, steady as you go people.
What do they do? Are they older than you?
No, one's older, one's younger.
Okay.
My older sister is in India. She works for a nonprofit and, married to a very successful man. And my younger brother works for Lincoln Labs here in Massachusetts. And he's an engineer. And so yeah, but I do remember, I think, we all three were raised, I think, with sort of the same, I guess, guidance in life, not guidance, targets that my parents set, in particular my dad, which was be distinct, right? So that was his big thing was, everybody can live. That's not a, you're human, you'll figure it out.
Right.
But to do something distinctive, to create something interesting, now that's cool, that's interesting, that's fun, that's admirable. So that has always stayed in my sort of DNA is, whenever I choose to do X versus Y, and this may be a flaw, by the way, I always choose the harder, distinct thing as opposed to the obvious, easy thing. Even if the obvious one may be far more lucrative.
Right. Is there an example, for instance, you can tell me in your life where you've done that?
When we were starting Aereo was a good example. All my investors had done phenomenally well with my last company prior to that, and I was at a place in time and professionally and personally as well that I could have chosen, and I was, I was 38 or something like that.
Right.
I could have basically said, let's just be a VC, and that'd be kind of fun, and I would have had a great 20, 25 years career doing that, or I could have, joined a large company or things like that. But of course, being me, I decided to take on the entire, media industry in one shot. Starry is another great example of that, right? I mean, after Aereo, could have easily said, okay, made a big run at it, and now it's time to start a gentle, kind B2B company that is going to provide, I don't know, I'm making this up, right? Storage services to XYZ, or it'll be the PQR for businesses or whatever. But, none of those were exciting enough in the terms of A, technologically, B, trying to move the world forward, right? So that sort of, unfortunately, that DNA kicks in and like, no, you got to do the cool, crazy, fun thing.
And why is that, Chet? Because I find that so fascinating. And I don't want to put you on the therapist couch and start start confessing to me your deep, dark secrets. But I'm always fascinated by that. Like, what drives you to take that hard road? And I understand part of that is from your dad, and saying to be distinct, but it's got to be more than that.
So there's this, you think about life and you say, okay, ordinary inputs lead to ordinary outputs. If you want extraordinary outcomes, it has to be extraordinary inputs or just sheer random luck, which some of, yes,
Yes, it happens, but yeah.
sometimes happens.
Right.
But more often than not, extraordinary outcomes mean extraordinary inputs.
And do you live your life that way too, or does it just apply to your business?
I try to, but I don't think so. I'm not sure. I think my entire life, even on personal side, as well as non-conventional. So I guess that is fairly consistent. The norm has never bothered me. I never follow sort of the prescribed path.
Mm-hmm.
So no, whatever you think is the right thing to do, whatever you think is going to make you happy at the end of the day is what you do.
So when you say your personal life is not the norm, like describe to me, without getting too personal, but describe to me like what you mean by that.
Life choices you make in terms of, who you're going, who your spouse is going to be, or why, or how you create a family. All of those things have been driven very unconventionally for me.
It's interesting because, when I talk to people, like, some people who take very big risks, let's say in finances or, in business, tell me that they're actually like the exact opposite. I think someone said this to me before, like that they're the exact opposite when it comes to their personal money, because even though they can take big risks with others, but because they take such big risks, they're also very conservative on their own.
So I am very conservative on personal financial stuff. I live a very modest life and, don't do anything, a couple of stupid things, but not but that's a different philosophical thing because I have an old school view, which is trying to make money with money is not the right thing to do. Because trying to make money is sort of making money is an outcome. It's nice when it happens. It lets you buy a bunch of, cool shoes and cars or planes or whatever. But if you're just trying to make money, and different people are different, it's not meant to be judgmental. Some
Right.
people get true happiness because they think that's what they've created, and that's totally fine. But for me, creating money from money is like, yes, your house can be a little bigger or more nicer vacation. But at the end of the day, I always measure myself, not purposefully, but just, I guess, because of, who I am as a person.
Mm-hmm.
Did you make something that nobody else could have? Did you do something that nobody else had the courage to, or had the smarts to, or had the tactical wherewithal to? And that's better for me.
And that's how you measure success.
For my personal self, yes. And I find it very strange in our society. We always say he's very successful or she's very successful, which essentially means they have money.
Right, exactly. Or power.
Or power. And whenever we say he's a very successful artist, they have to qualify it by saying artist, right?
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting observation. So you define success by accomplishments.
Yeah.
What kind of advice do you give other entrepreneurs? Like when you get people who say, Chet, like, give me like your secrets to success. Like, what do you usually say?
Number one, anything I will tell you is probably wrong because I'm more wrong than right. No, for sure. And then, do it for the right reasons. Try not to do it for making money. Mm-hmm. Having a good livelihood is good. That's great.
But is making money always the wrong reason?
Well, I think you make choices if you're optimizing purely for making money that are not necessarily consistent with, I think, what is going to ultimately make you happy.
Now, how do you make sure that you're taking care of your customers?
So first, you got to build a great product, good customer care, customer service, and then the rest is an outcome.
But do you like specifically go out and talk to customers? Like even with Starry, like are you out there like, making sure that you're in touch with them? I'm curious about the process that you do it.
Absolutely. And I just think that, and I'm sort of, I love selling. I love selling my ideas, my products to people. I love sort of the pitch part, convincing somebody to see your viewpoint from a product or service perspective is so much fun. So even at this early stage where we're just beginning to roll things out, myself, our CTO, we're all out, we canvass streets, we talk to people. People stop us because, we're usually out doing field testing and things like that, and they'll come up to us and say, hey, what are you guys doing? So we'll engage, we'll talk, we'll describe what we're doing, get their viewpoint. How much would you pay? Why would you pay? What's good, what's not in your experience here? So that's continuous. CEO is the best salesman for the company. The day you don't have a product or a product salesperson not running a company, you're basically counting penny. You're a bean counter. I mean, I always love, like, I don't know if you've read that book, Bob Lutz's book, about Detroit where the bean counters took over?
I haven't, but I've heard about it.
It's car guys versus bean counters, and it's just a fun read. I'm sure there's pros and cons and counter arguments to each side, but it's really an interesting description and as an engineer, really a fun read to sort of go back and the reason, for example, vast majority of the cars have V6s which is a terribly inefficient engine, by the way, is because the bean counters decided that cutting a V8 block, which was the norm in the 50s and 60s, as we got to the fuel efficient part of the 70s, was the right thing, except for the Germans who still stuck with inline six motors, which were far more efficient and far more well balanced and created a much pleasurable consumer experience. So it's just these, time and again, we see sort of these examples of people optimizing for money, which basically, what do you have? You have, a largely decimated Detroit, or hopefully it's coming back now, but,
Right.
and lots of foreign competition that came in and nobody else to blame except running the company the wrong way.
Right. So you see yourself as the top salesman at the company.
If the CEO cannot sell the product, they should get fired. They should get out of the job.
Yeah.
Get somebody else who can.
Chet, what would you consider is your worst mistake, or tell me a time when you failed and what you learned from that?
Oh God, that happens every day.
A lot of people say that, by the way, and I can identify as well.
It's. I don't think there's one worse mistake, right? I mean, I think unfortunately what happens is you make a mistake and then you try to fix that mistake by making a series of other mistakes, and you often forget when was the first mistake made that really led to the big mistake at the end, right? So I don't think I could sort of point out one. I could probably tell you hundreds of small mistakes that get compounded.
Right.
And I think the biggest mistake you can make is, and large companies make these mistakes, small companies make these mistakes, but I think largely they tend to be people mistakes. When there is somebody wrong in a job, and you either don't have the courage to make a change, or you can justify not making a change because of saying, well, but if I made this change right now, I would suffer in the short term because the person is doing XYZ, right? That's always a big mistake you can make, because as large companies are driven by shareholder, like quarterly things, small companies are driven by small term milestones, right? If you remember going back to it, this is my end of year cash balance or 18-month out cash balance that I want. These are the milestones I want to hit. The same fears get into you. You're basically saying, I'm going to get to that particular cash board. I'm going to get those milestones if I don't do XYZ.
I hear this all the time from entrepreneurs and CEOs, which is one of their biggest mistakes is holding on to someone for too long. Someone they should have let go earlier. And, I imagine that must be something you've experienced as well.
Yep.
Are you able to avoid that the next time, or is it just, how do you shake that off?
So one of my co-founders, Joe Lebowski, who's far more sophisticated about these things than I am, has this really great saying: your peers fire you before your boss does. So what you really, as a leader or manager or whatever you want to call it, what you really want to be observing is peer interaction. Basically, if you are not a person who can deliver for your peer group, they will stop sharing responsibility with you.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the moment you see that happen, you kind of have to have a honest conversation across the board and make a change.
And how do you do that? Because that was one of our questions to a lot of bosses, which is, how do you let someone go? Like, how do you fire someone?
You have to be honest up front and very clear. We used to do that at Starry, at Aereo. Prior to that, I was very bad at it. Here, it's much more, make a decision. You have a conversation with the individual and say, look, we think you are a good person, which is why we wanted you at the beginning. But given these set of circumstances, either we don't have faith in your judgment, or it's not a good fit, or what we thought the job was going to be is not what it's turned out to be. Because a lot of times, right, people will take aspirational jobs. And by aspirational, I don't mean climbing up the ladder in the same discipline that you're in, versus much more of a sort of sideways aspirational job. So a good example would be an engineer who's done really well, but he's kind of written the same stupid module like 10 years in a row now, right? And wants to try his or her hand at something completely different. And they say, I want to go into product management. Or it's some marketing MBA type who's read that product management is where all the action is, and that's what they want to do. But so they've taken an aspirational job, and I think it's good for companies to do that, because you never know, right? One individual that can think outside the box and do something different can change the outcome completely. So it's good to take that risk, but you have to keep an eye on that risk, because 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, that transition isn't going to happen.
And why is that? I'm curious.
Because people try to do their old job in a new gig, which is why people that come from large companies invariably don't succeed at a small company till the small company gets to a point where their large company gig can kick in. And more often than not, people in small companies can't necessarily just transition into a much larger company and succeed instantaneously, because they still think that, collecting 4 people around a table, making a decision and driving it through is the way to get it done. When they're forgetting human inertia and, human politics and all that other stuff that goes with it. So you really have to be careful about, people are basically going to try their old job in a new gig as a start. And very few will honestly walk in and say, you know what, that's not what I'm supposed to do. That's not what I should do. I should do something completely different.
Right. Very few people can actually make that transition and be honest with themselves about it.
Yeah. And most people won't walk into a room and say, I have no idea what people just talked about, so can somebody please explain this to me?
Right.
And still feel like, they're not idiots.
That's very true. Chet, curious a little bit, and you and I've talked a lot in the past about Aereo and sort of the aftermath, but was Aereo and the loss at the Supreme Court, was that considered your lowest moment in your career?
No, gosh, no. The whole point of Aereo was that sort of binary outcome, one way or the other. And all of us, employees, founders, shareholders, everybody signed up for the exact same known risk, which was either it's going to be incredible or it's going to be zero, and we have to be prepared for it. I think the fact, and in all fairness, Betty, none of us expected, and that includes myself, that it was going to become sort of this big story. That wasn't the intention behind it. The intention was we were going to win at the district court quietly. We're going to win at the circuit court quietly. Then we're going to take a step back, see how the market is developing. We'll stay small and spend, $5, $10, $20 million and keep it in a way where we can figure out, because we were convinced the industry was going to change and people were going to have to move content online, and there was going to be a need for a platform that was neutral, safe. It wasn't controlled by Comcast or this or that or whatever. And lots of people are going to need those core capabilities. I mean, a good example is MLBAM, right? I mean, that's kind of the function that they're providing in some ways.
Right.
And we said, for linear television with time and place shifting capability in the cloud, this is going to be a really, really cool opportunity. So let's start here and see what happens. And it sort of snowballed after that. So we were kind of surprised at that. That was sort of the one unintended side effect, which I think, in hindsight, I guess I should have known. I don't know, but media loves to talk about media, right? And then didn't quite understand that when we were starting out.
So in the end, what do you think you learned the most out of that?
I guess from a cultural perspective, that it was really interesting to see, heartening to see that despite the odds, we were at 120 people by the time we shut the company down, and people were still willing to be, employees. We had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of users. People are still willing to, buy the product or buy the service.
Right.
Even when we shut down, I mean, we would get, as we hit pause and send an email out, people, and we said we're going to suspend, and well, by the way, we're going to refund your last 30 days because of all this craziness. I think like 70% of our users emailed saying, no, keep the money, keep charging us. You're going to need it to fight these people.
Wow.
So it was it was fun. It was great to learn that and I'd never done direct to consumer prior to that, right? So to kind of get a sense that what a brand entails in terms of its sensibility, in terms of its appeal to consumers, and how you sort of build that relationship is pretty powerful. And if you can get it right outside of adverse circumstances, that's incredibly powerful. Second thing, I guess, we all said this is the one and only time we're going to take this huge binary risk. It's worth it, so let's take it. And so we took it, and I don't think I will ever probably take such a huge binary risk ever after this. Mm-hmm. Not because of the risk in terms of capital. I think it was much more, in conclusion to me, it was much more of we created something really, really useful. In fact, I still talk to like a lot of TV execs, and they say, well, we wish we had that platform now because we would have made use of it. Not broadcasters, but in general, right? Linear programmers who are struggling to find distribution outlets. And in particular, I think as people are beginning to understand that they're no longer just content suppliers in this new world, they're content suppliers, marketers, technology platform, and user interfaces all in one. And I think the days where you could expect your company to just have a single competency in this are over. You have to be all of the above. It's kind of like, Mark Andreessen's like software is eating the world.
That's it for this week. Please stay tuned for next week's episode. And did you know Radiate is now a video platform as well? So instead of just listening, you can now watch great leaders talk about their successes. This week, CEOs talk about how to hold better meetings, because who actually loves sitting in a meeting? Not me. So watch it to find out what baloney has to do with holding a better meeting. Go to radiateinc.com to watch our videos, register for our premium offerings, sign up for our newsletter. Again, that's radiateinc.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Thanks for joining us. I'm Betty Lou. Talk to you next week on Radiate.